It is great to spend this moment with all of you today. We're here in this building. I am encouraged today that we are one big church family, putting our trust in God together and praising His name this morning because He is so good. He is good to us. And it's great to spend this moment with you today. On my left hand, I have a ring that I wear on my fourth finger. Being so close, I can show it to you on the camera right here. How's that? It's a simple golden band. It's a family heirloom passed down on Alyssa's side of the family. And it's a ring that my wife Alyssa gave to me almost 6 years ago now. It's kind of hard to believe it. And like some of you probably are the same way, it's a ring that I very rarely ever take off of my finger. About once a year when I'm making sausage cheese balls on Christmas Eve, I will take off this ring because I think that the sausage cheesy goodness is best put together when mixed by hand. But other than that, it pretty much just stays glued to my finger. And Alyssa has one of these too. It's a little less simple, a little more ornate. It's got a woven yellow gold band with a little halo of diamonds and then a one center stone. That's what you would see if you were looking at it this morning. What you wouldn't see are the little saved up paychecks from summer jobs and part-time jobs in school. You wouldn't see my white knuckles driving 6 hours home after a snowstorm because the jeweler in Searcy was late getting it ready and the semester ended and a blizzard hit and snowed us in, and I was not about to propose without that ring in my hand, and I was not about to wait another weekend. It had to be both, and it had to be now. And I spent a lot of time actually just looking and deciding what the perfect ring would be to give to Alyssa. And I was way out of my league on that, but thankfully some hints had been dropped along the way, and I was able to find something that I really hoped she would like. Because that ring in and of itself is this precious and costly thing, and it's this beautiful thing. And when you pick out a ring for an engagement, you want that ring to be just right. You want it to be something that she has and something that she loves. But then, of course, also, it's never just about the ring, is it? Obviously. An engagement ring, any engagement ring, it's kind of a two-part gift. It's a package deal. And naturally, I would have been a little bit disappointed if I had given that ring to Alyssa and she said, "Oh, great, I love this ring. Thank you so much." Now, you, on the other hand, I'm not too crazy about. That would have been a little bit of a disappointment because the two go together. And in giving that ring to Alyssa, I, of course, wanted her to have more than just a ring. That gift was more than just a gift. It was a union, a relationship, an invitation to become family. And when we exchanged rings, we exchanged more than just that thing, but we share our lives. We share our lives with one another. And I wouldn't have wanted to do that without the ring, that precious, costly gift. But the ring and me, like it or not, we're kind of a package deal. On the one hand, there's the gift of that precious thing. On the other hand, there is the relationship. And when those two are put together, the costly gift and the shared life, that's when that moment is given so much meaning. And today, as we turn to our passage from the scriptures, I think that we find something very much like that. We are turning today to a letter of Paul called the letter called 1 Thessalonians. If you like, you can get out a Bible and be turning there if you wish to follow along. It's 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, where we'll be spending most of our time this morning. We spent 4 weeks in Esther leading up to this, and now we're turning to something new. And as we turn to this letter of Paul, it may be worth mentioning that this just might be the earliest written words of the New Testament. And it's debatable which of Paul's letters was written first, but it seems pretty clear that his letters were written down before the Gospels were written down. And there's a lot of reasons to believe that this, among his letters, may have been the first one that he wrote. And so as we turn to the words of Scripture today, we may be turning to the earliest written words of our New Testament. And when we turn there to 1 Thessalonians, what we find is that Paul is reminding the church that the gift that he has given to them was a two-part gift. It was a package deal, and it's better that way. Let's take a look at what it has to say. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. We're going to start in verse 1, but our key verses for today are going to be the ones we read in our scripture reading a moment ago, verses 7 and 8. So pay special attention to those two. So here we go, verse 1. This is Paul and Silas and Timothy writing these words. You yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully mistreated at Philippi, as you know, we had courage in our God to declare to you the gospel of God, in spite of great opposition. For our appeal does not spring from deceit or impure motives or trickery, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the message of the gospel, so also we speak, not to please people, but to please God who tests our hearts. As you know, and as God is our witness, we never came with words of flattery or with a pretext for greed, nor did we seek the praise of people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, like a nurse tenderly caring for her own children. So deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. So what is Paul doing and talking about in this part of perhaps his very first letter in the New Testament? What is he trying to say to this young church? Well, it sounds to me like he's sort of taking a look back at the beginnings of their shared story, isn't he? Because he's talking about the time that he spent among them in their city. It's a time that if you want to read more about it, you can find a little bit in Acts chapter 17. Paul visited this city on his second missionary journey as he passed through northern Greece, sharing the gospel through every place that he went. And here, as he begins to reflect on that time, he's reminding them, isn't he, of this precious gift that he brought into their city. You yourselves know, verse 1, we didn't come to you in vain. But when we came to you, we came bearing what? What did we bring? Verse 2, the gospel of God, in spite of great opposition. When Paul and company come to town, they bring to this city and to this people that this gift that they are giving them, it's nothing less than the gospel. The gospel of God, a message that is not deceitful or impure or tricky, says verse 3. A message that was given with no hint of greed, with no pretext for self-promotion, says verse 5. This is a message that is pure, costly, and precious. The gospel of God. It's something even more precious than gold, is it not? And this is Paul's gift. This is God's gift through Paul to this city. For through this gift, this precious message, all those who receive it can come to know the true and living God. That's what chapter 1, verse 9 says, probably just one page to the left in your Bibles. In chapter 1, verse 9, it shows us why this gift is such a precious gift, and it shows us how, when the Thessalonians received it, they turned away from worthless idols, and they turned to worship a true and living God, a God mighty enough to raise Jesus from the dead, and not just Jesus, but you and me as well. Jesus who, according to verse 10, rescues us from the wrath that is coming. This is why the gospel is so precious a gift. The gospel enables us to come to know a true and living God. It helps us to encounter Jesus, the risen rescuer of our lives and souls. And in 1 Thessalonians 2, Paul says that's what we brought with us to town. Something more valuable, something more pure and costly and precious than even the finest jewelry. It's the gospel of God. But then they don't just stop there. Paul has reminded them from verse 1 to verse 7 of chapter 2 of the gospel that he brought, that precious gift. And now in verse 8, he's going to say, this is a gift that keeps on giving. This gift is not just a gift unto itself. And when we shared it with you, we shared with you and continue to share with you even more than just that gift. Thus, verse 8, take a look again. Paul says, so deeply do we care for you that we are determined to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become so very dear to us. Did you catch that? Not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves. This is the gift we bring to you, Paul says. It's the gospel, and we give also to you our very lives. It's a package deal, like that engagement ring, which is precious and costly in and of itself, points to more than just itself, but rather to a relationship, an invitation to become family. In the same way, this gospel, costly and precious, speaks to more than even itself. It points to even greater things. The gospel is this invitation into deeper relationships with God and with other human beings, deeper relationships than any other avenue in life can provide. And to accept its message, like accepting an engagement ring, means more than just personal gain. It means more than just obtaining something for yourself. It means becoming family. It means being willing to share your very self with those whom the gospel has united and those that it will seek to unite. What I'm trying to say is that the gospel and you are a package deal. And for this reason, as Paul knows well, the gospel and you are best shared together. Now just think about the way that Paul chooses to share the gospel in his ministry and why it is so effective, because I think it boils down in large part to this one thing. Paul shares the gospel relationally. When he shares the gospel, he shares of himself as well along with it. When Paul goes to a new town like Thessalonica, he is not just a distributor of information. He's a person living amongst and sharing in the lives of the people in that city, he shares not only the gospel, but his very self. He speaks not just a message, but a message that he is visibly living out and sharing in the way that he goes about his life. And he does this like even in the ordinary stuff too. In the ordinary stuff of life. So if you go back to our chapter and look at the next verse 9 of chapter 2, Paul is going to remind them of our labor and toil. You remember our labor and toil, brothers. We worked night and day so that we might not be a burden to any of you while we proclaimed the gospel of God. And presumably when he talks about laboring night and day, what he's talking about is working as a tent maker, which is not a job of special acclaim or prestige or advantage, but it's a job that Paul did all over the place as he shared the gospel message. And that occupation, that ordinary daily activity led to some extraordinary results. Because as Paul labors, he lives amongst and he shares in the lives of the people that he hopes to share the gospel with. People whom he's trying to share God's love with. And in the way that Paul carries himself as he works, it gives authenticity to his message, doesn't it? Because he's working for a purpose. He said there's a reason we labored night and day. It was so that we would not burden you and so that you would see and hear the gospel and be free to hear it. He not only shares a message, he shares of himself. His labor and toil is a gift that is given in tandem with the gospel. And as Paul does these things, he communicates more than just information through sharing both the gospel and himself. Paul actually forms these really deep bonds with the church in this city. They are bonds like family. Take a look again at our passage here and look especially at verse 11. What does Paul say there? We dealt with each of you like a father with his children. That's how Paul sees his relationship to those whom the gospel has united. Like a father and his children. This is family to him. Look a few verses back in verse 7. We cared for you deeply, like a nursing mother tenderly caring for her own children. Like that's how close the bond is, these bonds of family. And as we shared the gospel with you, Paul is saying, we invited you into our lives and into our hearts. So deeply do we care for you that we resolve to share with you not just the gospel of God, but our own selves, because that's how much we care for you. Paul's own ministry, the gospel and his very self, they're given together. They're a package deal. And when he shares them together, the result is more beautiful and more effective, like that engagement ring and the lives that it unites in the bonds of family. The gospel is a gift like that. But its beauty and its power are not fully realized until we learn to share it along with ourselves. The gospel and you are a package deal. And if you ask me, this powerful combination is the thing that we must learn to harness in our lives. And it's the great power that we have at our fingertips in order for us to become as effective as we can be in sharing the gospel, and in order for us to show the full beauty of this precious gift, we must learn to share it, not as mere information alone, but in relationship, in the fullness of our lives and selves. And I say that as someone who's still learning how to do this myself, but I'm convinced of its importance. I'm thankful that sharing the gospel and sharing your life are a package deal. I'm thankful that sharing the gospel along with our lives can show just how much we care. And I'm thankful for those people who have learned to do this better than I have and are helping to show the way. I'd like to spend a moment as we conclude describing one person like that. One of those people who I think really lived this verse out really well is my own granddad, my mom's dad, who passed away just a few months ago. His life reminds me of what Paul was saying in this passage. And in some ways, it almost makes me laugh comparing my granddad to Paul, because he's kind of like the last person I could imagine like standing up on Mars Hill and debating with the philosophers there. I think he would have thought those philosophers were just plain dumb if you had asked him. And he definitely wouldn't have wanted all the attention that comes with giving some great speech. That just wasn't him. But he and Paul do have this verse in common. It's the way that my granddad believed that sharing the gospel in himself, his time, his effort, his life, those things were best shared together. For most of his life, he worked as a training instructor having to do with helicopters. A lot of that was at Bell Helicopter. Before that, he worked for a while in mineral wells. And one of his jobs there, he was heavily involved in this training program for Vietnamese students. And these men would travel far from their home to come and live in Texas and take part in these training programs that my granddad would help to teach. And my mom tells me about how every Sunday morning he would drive from Weatherford to Mineral Wells to invite any of those Vietnamese exchange students who wanted to come with him to church. And he would pick them up on Sunday morning early, drive them to church, and then right after church, they would go back to his house to share a meal with his family that my grandmother would make for them. They would spend the day at the house, spending time with one another. They would go to evening services together, and then late in the evening, he would drive them back and then drive his way home again. And through all of these shared meals and car rides, these students far from home started to kind of be a part of my mom's family. They would go to their graduations. One time they even went to Atlanta to see one graduate from their program because they had been invited into this family. My granddad was sharing not just the gospel, but his own self. And I think a lot of people saw that in him. I'm very thankful to Randy Flatt, who through his connections with Bell Helicopter actually shared with my family a list of comments that people at Bell Helicopter had made when they heard about my granddad passing away. And it was just something to see this perspective. Comments like, John was one of the kindest men I met in 37 years at Bell Helicopter. Or John's one of those people you want your children to turn out to be like as an adult. People said, always had a smile. He never forgot your name. One person said, he was the kind of man I wanted to be. He didn't just train his students. He adopted them. And in those things, I see a person who was living out our verse today from our passage. He was sharing not just the gospel, but his own self. And doing it in the relationships he found through things like his work in helicopter training programs. And because he went about his life in this way, people really respected him for that. And his beliefs, they were viewed as authentic, and his intentions were seen as genuine, and his efforts brought people closer into the bonds of family. And that is the sort of power that I think we have at our fingertips when we really put this verse to work in our lives, and we try as best we can to share not only the gift of the gospel, but also our own selves. Because the gospel and you are truly best shared together. And I wonder what this verse might mean for you in your life. Like, what does it mean for you to share not only the gospel, but also your own self? What does it mean for me to apply a verse like this in my life? The exciting thing is that the answers to that question could be so many different things. There was a book that came out recently that was somewhat popular in Christian circles. It was called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. That was the title of it. And it was a book simply about this kind of thing, that, sharing the gospel and also being hospitable is a really powerful combination because you're sharing from yourself. Well, we're living in a time right now that may make that kind of tricky. But I wonder if that sentiment could be expanded. And I wonder how you might finish the title of that book. Maybe it's not The Gospel Comes with a House Key for you, but the gospel comes with a fishing pole or with a plate of chocolate chip cookies. Maybe the gospel comes with a timesheet where you do your 9 to 5 each week. Maybe the gospel comes with a pen and spiral notebook or a stack of cards and envelopes and stamps. For Paul, the gospel came with tent poles and canvas for his job as a tent maker. Maybe it comes with a wrench or a math textbook or a treble clef and bass clef for you in your life. My point is simply that we've been given the opportunity to share this precious gift. And that gift becomes even sweeter when we share it along with ourselves, our authentic, gifted, ordinary selves. God can use people like my granddad and you and me to do extraordinary things as he brings together people far and near into his gospel-formed family. And when we share of ourselves as we share of the precious gospel, I think we have a chance to say to the people we can reach what Paul says in this verse. So deeply do we care for you. Well, the good news today is that God so deeply cared for you that he gave his only son, born into human life, born to live a sinless life and die a cruel death on the cross for your sake. That's the precious gift, the gospel. And maybe somebody here today needs to respond to that gospel, that so deeply did Christ care for you that he gave of his own self, like to the fullest, so that you might be washed clean and born anew. Maybe the response for you is thinking about that question. How can I not just share the gospel, that most precious gift, but share it through me in the many ways that God has blessed and gifted me, the opportunities that I have? However you may be called or challenged today, we give this moment now to reflect and respond while we stand.